do this every quarter. We have a Q&A, we move it around the campus. We try to jiggle the time a little bit deliberately so that we always don't take a lunch hour. And sometimes we have a topic, sometimes and always, there's always time for open forum. I try to answer every question that I can. You may not believe this, but I don't know all the answers. So there are times that I have to take back a question. If you're willing to identify yourselves, and this is the case for today as well, then we can get back to you. For those of you who are uncomfortable raising your hand about something, or where you feel you're uncomfortable about the particular question that you pose, we'll have some cards. And you can certainly, again, if you're willing to identify yourselves, give us your email. Either I'll answer the question here, or if I can't answer it, we'll get back to you. We'll probably pass mics around the room so that we can hear everybody. There are seats right here in the middle for those of you who are looking for seats. And with those preliminary comments about the quarterly Q&As, let's dive into our topic, which, as you've seen from the e-boards and from the Elm and from my president's newsletter, relates to something that is very much a matter of concern here at UMB. And I don't need to remind anybody that it is a matter of concern nationally. It's particularly a matter of concern in academic medical centers. And I don't say that to be defensive, to say that, well, of course, this is an issue for everybody. We're not special. None of that matters, except to help us be informed about best practices. Yeah, maybe this will sound corny to you or look corny to you, but I put our values up for a reason. And I took this version off my office wall. I know you can't see it, but the point is, I look at this every day. Again, I don't care how trite and corny that sounds. I look at this every day. For those of you who don't know how these came about, when I came here, almost 9 years, when I came back to Maryland to have the privilege of being the president, we started in on a strategic plan. It was a very inclusive process. The process was maybe even more important than the strategic plan, because it was inclusive. It involved several hundred people, students, staff, faculty, administrators, and they came back to me and said, it's not simply enough to have a strategic plan. Your strategic plan needs to stand on some core values. So these values were created. And frankly, while we can focus on civility, because I think the matter of mistreatment, sexual harassment, concerns about retaliation all fall into that bucket. In fact, this is a conversation about all of those values. Because if we're to achieve every one of those values to the point we wish to achieve them, we have to have better performance in terms of meeting these goals. And I hardly put these up, and I hardly have them on my office wall or on the garage walls. You see these painted on the garage walls. Yes, it's to remind us, but to remind us of the fact that we are far from perfect. I know that. And I'm going to need the help of certainly everybody in this room, but everybody on this campus in being committed to saying we live our core values. Because we fall short. We fall short at times. There is work to be done. I have some experts, colleagues that you're going to hear from shortly. And by the way, we're not going to drone on because we need to hear from you so that we can do better here. I am going to invite in just a moment two of my colleagues to stand up, introduce themselves, and help with the conversation. Susan Buskirk, who is our Deputy Chief Accountability Officer, and Mikkel Kushner, who is our Title IX Coordinator and expert. I'll introduce them in a moment. I'm going to tell you two things that I hope to stand up. No, I intend to stand up in the next 30 days. And I've pilot tested them, particularly with women on campus, but you're free to give me your opinion, of course. One, and this may not exactly be the name, is the equivalent of something I did when I came to campus around diversity and inclusion. Many of you know that we have a Diversity Advisory Council. It's very active. It's been in place for the whole time I've been here. It has representation from all the constituencies at UMB, and certainly faculty, staff, and students. And I believe, although again, we have a long way to go, it's moved the needle in terms of how we behave to each other, how we respect the differences among us, in terms of what's visible in skin color, in gender orientation, etc. That's made a difference. Regrettably, I didn't do something else I brought back with me from the University of Kentucky College of Medicine. When I came to the College of Medicine in 2004, I created a diversity advisory committee for the dean. I also realized that I had 200 women faculty in the College of Medicine, and of course, many staff. And I set about to bring each and every one of them in to my office in small groups so that we could have a conversation and so that I could understand issues that were particularly important to women: sexual harassment, gender equity, promotion, whatever was on their mind. And I learned, and we made adjustments. In retrospect, I regret not having the equivalent of a women's advisory council. I will make that happen, hopefully within the next 30 days. In consultation with many parties here, I'll bet I could get a lot of volunteers, and I'll be glad to hear from you. We'll try to balance it out, and this will be a standing group. This is not to deal with the crisis, but there is something to deal with the crisis that will be a time-limited group, and which will relate to the Women's Advisory Council. And that is a working group, a task force, to get us some guidance into how to get closer to that civility core value, particularly around issues of sexual harassment, particularly around issues of Title IX. I'll give you an example. And I promised I would not talk and talk and talk, and I apologize for that. But I learned in another piece of work, it's not important to tell you the exact story now, but I was asked by the state to look at one of its bodies, its governor's appointed bodies, that deals with complaints, that deals with things that were allegedly not done right. They were wrong. And this group was a very well-meaning professional body. But when I did what the state asked me to do and analyzed what they were doing, all they were doing was dealing with complaints, as they should, but it would have also been probably more important to make sufficient time to educate so that the complaints were fewer. We don't do much of that, maybe not much at all, in terms of educating people in small groups and in appropriate ways, other than the online compliance that we have to do each year, which we're going to continue to do. We don't spend really any resources and time gathering people in small groups and saying this kind of behavior cannot be tolerated. Saying it not in a way that is in your face, but to educate. And I want to see that happen. When I've talked to Title IX consultants around the country, this is what I hear repeatedly. You've got to educate. I know it's hard to believe because we have a university suffused with colleagues who are intelligent. But again, I will tell you as a dean, I had a lot of cup of coffee conversations with people who were extraordinarily polished, extraordinarily intelligent, presumably brought up the right way, who at the end of the conversation would say to me, God, I never realized I was coming off that way. And they were genuine. We have to educate. So that's an example of a task force that will help us resource what we need to do in order to get better at this. So now let's focus in on civility, particularly with regard to sexual harassment and Title IX issues. I would just tell you that under the word civility here, it says it very well, I think. The university expects interactions to be professional, ethical, respectful, and courteous. And that's where we need to get to. Let me introduce Susan Buskirk, followed by Mikkel Kushner.
Thank you, Dr. Perman. Good afternoon. I also would like to thank you for coming out today. I'm on, I think I'm. All right.
Just grab a handheld.
Yeah, okay, and turn it on. Got it?
How about now? Yeah. I'm battling a cold too, so I apologize for that, the quality of my voice. But as Dr. Perman said, I'm Susan Buskirk. I'm the Deputy Chief Accountability Officer for the campus, and I work with Roger Ward in the Office of Accountability and Compliance and manage and oversee a team of individuals that work in various functional areas of compliance, including the area that responds to discrimination, sexual harassment, and Title IX concerns. Building on what Dr. Perman said, I want to emphasize, the Office of Accountability and Compliance, oftentimes the focus, and we focus on compliance, or the perception is that we're all about compliance. And we are about compliance, but we are about more than that as well. We do have an outreach and education program that's, I would say, is in its infancy, but we're coming along. A year and a half ago, I hired a program outreach and education director, and Stephanie Seworth, can you just stand up briefly, is the program director for education and outreach. We also have a number of mechanisms or different ways that individuals can come to us and report concerns or ask for advice and consultation. We have a consultation line that's set up, and that's not a hotline for reporting, but it is a mechanism for the community to communicate with our office in a prospective and proactive manner. So if you have questions about compliance issues or about how to problem solve an issue, or you have an ethical dilemma that may need to be referred or to, or you're not quite sure what to do with it, you can certainly contact us. And then third, we have the Ethics Point reporting line that is open to everybody on the campus for reporting concerns and issues confidentially or anonymously. But a lot of what we do is what we're going through currently is, as Dr. Perman said, trying to listen to the community, listen to the campus community, and hear from you all, and be able to respond to the needs of this campus and create the environment that Dr. Perman is talking about. And with that, I will introduce Mikkel Kushner, who joined us just about 2 years ago as our Title IX coordinator, and she's going to tell you more about our discrimination Title IX activities.
Can you all hear me through the microphone I'm holding over here? So I don't need this one? Because a third would really be overwhelming. Okay, we're great. If anyone has connections to the fashion industry, women's clothing with pockets would be great. Dr. Perman, thank you so much for having this question and answer period. Thank you all for being here. I'm the university's Title IX coordinator, but I think it's more important for me to introduce myself to you all as your Title IX coordinator. The purpose of a Title IX coordinator is to receive information, to recognize patterns within an institution, to be able to communicate what individuals are experiencing within the community, especially as it relates to sex and gender-based discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual violence, to senior leadership, so that we can be doing the work we need to do to create safer communities. The underlying idea being that equal access to education requires that we all, as employees and students, feel like we can safely enter our workplaces and our places of learning without fear of either sexual harassment, sexual violence, or any kind of discrimination that limits those opportunities. I view the very specific guidance we have around Title IX as a starting place for looking at how we work around issues of discrimination more broadly, which is why general conversations about civility are so important when we're having a conversation specifically about sexual harassment and sexual violence. I have had a good number of opportunities over almost 2 years to work with many people in this room, certainly not all of you. I see lots of new faces, and what's really important for me about opportunities like this is the opportunity for you to see who I am and to understand the broader scope of what my office is and what my department within the Office of Accountability and Compliance's goals and efforts are with respect to discrimination and sexual harassment specifically. Because while our office is known as a place that receives reports and does investigations around issues of sexual harassment and discrimination, that's a very small part of what we seek to do more broadly so that we understand these issues as a community and so that we're talking about these issues as a community. Because I can't do it alone, and Susan and I can't do it just the two of us sitting in an office, nor can we do it only in partnership with Dr. Ward, with President Perman. We need all to be involved in these conversations. And discrimination is a difficult topic to talk about in any context, sexual harassment in particular. One of the things that I think is especially important for us to recognize as we gather in any kind of group to talk about these topics is the fact that when we're talking about something like sexual harassment, we're not just talking about an academic concept or a social construct. We're talking about a topic that affects every single person in this room. Everyone in this room has either had a boundary violated, potentially is recognizing that they have violated someone's boundaries, has stepped in to help someone who's having their boundaries violated, or recognizes they had an opportunity to do that and didn't do so. So when we're talking about these topics, we can talk about things like reporting, we can talk about things like investigations and equity in terms of investigating in a way that is fair both to an individual who's saying that they were impacted by sexual harassment and the person who is being brought forward as potentially having engaged in that behavior. We can do all of that, but we also need to be having conversations like this one, not just in this room, but more generally. We need to be thinking about the ways in which we observe what's happening in our academic environments, in our workplace environments. We need to think about how we're participating or how our lack of action is in some way contributing, and we need to be thinking about those environments in that broader context. My purpose beyond those investigations and receiving reports is really to help motivate that conversation, whether it's in groups or by any one of you contacting me directly or contacting a member of the staff at the Office of Accountability and Compliance directly, so that we can have conversations like the one that we're starting today. There's so much more I could say, but I really don't want to right now. I really would like to be able to turn things back over to President Perman so we can have a Q&A that, again, I see as the beginning of continued conversation. That conversation can happen in a Women's Advisory Council. It can happen through a task force, but it also needs to be happening on the streets and in the hallways and in our classrooms. And I guess that is just one more thing I will say before I turn it back over, which is we are in a really unique position here. Title IX is a concern across all parts of higher education, but we are in a position where we are educating professionals in areas that have a very, very specific and clear connection to this topic. So it's not just about safe classrooms and safe learning environments and safe workplaces. It's about becoming and being better doctors and nurses and social workers and lawyers and pharmacists and dentists and researchers who understand this topic, not just in terms of our own personal experiences or the experiences of our colleagues and peers, but in terms of how we're going to be affecting our professions and the individuals in the community who benefit from the work we do in our professions. So that's just one other thing that I want to encourage you all to be thinking about, as we start this conversation from the place of concern for the experiences of individuals with respect to discrimination and sexual harassment in higher education. With that.
Thank you, Mikkel.
Sure.
While you're hopefully thinking about what you'd like to put forward here, and we'll have a mic, I want to just reprise one thing that Susan mentioned. It's the issue of people desiring to protect their anonymity when they have something to say. And I'm not here, I don't have the nerve to stand in front of you and condemn that behavior, because believe me, I get it. There are many reasons why victims don't wish to come forward. They don't want to come forward because too often in our America they become the villain. They're embarrassed, whatever. I understand. Here's what I'd like to put in front of you, and please rebut if we're not doing it the way we should. Susan or Mikkel mentioned a hotline, ethics point. If you don't know about it, we need to do a better job of communicating it. You can have your anonymity and still allow us a way to get back. To get back for at least two purposes. Get back to you for at least two purposes. If we're going to investigate well, consider the fact that we might need a little more information if the complainant is willing to share it. That would help. But for me, even more important than that, when somebody stands up and complains, they have absolutely every right to have some feedback, some answer. Otherwise, what happens? It's what happened to us a couple of months ago. People put forth a complaint which may be totally valid. And then, since there's no way by definition to get back, if I get a letter with no identification on it, what is the assumption that people make? You didn't do anything about it. You didn't listen. Please, if I could get some help with that, while protecting anonymity when people want it, I would appreciate it. Please.
I'll ask a question. Jennifer?
Ms. Lichman.
Mikhail, could you talk about what Dr. Furman just said, that nothing happened? Talk about how many complaints we get and how many are resolved, and what's the mechanism for reporting that?
Sure.
Stand up.
So I can answer part of this question, then I'm going to have Susan answer the part about numbers more specifically. We do have a hotline. It is a hotline that gives you the option to remain anonymous. It is a very easy hotline to find. At the bottom of just about every page of our university website, if you go to the bottom, you'll see a little icon that says hotline. There's a whistle on it, but it's not a whistleblower hotline, but the whistle is how you'll recognize it. And if you click on that icon, you'll go to a page that provides you with either a phone number or a number of links to different topics that you might want to report on. The website is managed by a third-party vendor, which is part of how we assure that we assure you that if you're choosing to remain anonymous, that we can't track back and find out who you are. Right? So this third-party vendor has a call center. You can use the phone number and you can call and you can make a report that way. And you can also choose to make your report online. There is the option to identify who you are as a reporter. There's also the option to remain anonymous. And at the end of the reporting process, there's a code that an individual receives. And that code allows the individual to come back to review the report, to find out if we've asked any questions, to find out if we are seeking any kind of follow-up that will assist us in our response. It also allows us to provide updates with respect to what our office is attempting to do to resolve the issue. That follow-up is extremely important. I think one of the most frustrating cases I've ever received on the hotline was one where I very much wanted to be able to respond comprehensively to what was being described, but what the person in the report didn't realize was that they were articulating a very real fear for their own safety. And they were staying anonymous because of that fear for their own safety. And what I recognized in the description there was that to take action would potentially put that person at risk if I didn't have the ability to follow up with them and talk about safety precautions, to talk about interim measures. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is when using that hotline, if you're not choosing to identify yourself, or if somebody else you know is not choosing to identify themselves, that you come back or encourage that person to come back and follow up with us. The hotline is a great option in terms of those anonymous reports, but there's also a lot of flexibility in terms of direct reports to our office. In more instances than not, our office's efforts will be to work with an individual to determine what best approach we can take to their concern that does alleviate any of the risks that they view as associated with the report they're making. There are very few circumstances where my office would be obligated to take extreme measures without cooperation and participation from that individual, saying that in fact they're comfortable with the process that we're taking. It's a collaborative effort. But bottom line, that hotline is at the bottom of all of those website pages. And I think Susan can provide a little bit of information regarding the numbers we see on that hotline. Did I get everything that you're looking for there? Okay, great.
One more comment about complaining and wishing anonymity. Over my years in leadership, I've certainly had people who are trusting enough of me who come to me and say, I need to tell you something, but I don't want you to do anything about it. If it's a violation of law, if it's a Title IX violation, I can't do that. I have to make sure it is investigated, correct?
Absolutely. And along those same lines, something else to keep in mind is if somebody is coming to you and requesting that confidentiality, you can make that concern, you can make that challenge mine. It doesn't have to remain your burden to bear. The conversation that we can initially have if you are making that report is, what are the individual's concerns about confidentiality? You are required to give all details that you might have to me, but then we can make an assessment from there regarding whether or not that confidentiality can otherwise be maintained while we take the appropriate steps to address whatever the violation or concern may be. So minimally, let's make sure we're having that conversation. It can be so tempting and so much a reflection of one's concern for another individual to say, I hear you saying you don't want me to tell anyone, I won't, right? Because somebody has confided in you. But the next responsible step in terms of making sure that they've confided in you in a way that will result in some sort of effective response is to minimally make sure that you're having that conversation with our office about potential next steps given those concerns about confidentiality.
Susan.
Yeah, so directly answer the
Can you hear?
volume, the numbers. Can you hear me? So fiscal/academic year 2018, our office opened and closed, responded to 79 specific allegations of sexual misconduct. And so far in 2019, that number's 44 as of this morning.
That's
Now-
fiscal year,
Yeah. fiscal-
not 2
yeah.
weeks of January.
Right, no, fiscal year, yes.
I don't want us to think that we're falling apart.
Fiscal and academic year, yeah.
On the other hand, and I hope this isn't true, but if I could just comment on that, and you can probably guess what I'm going to say. If we do this right, we're going to have an uptick. We expect that.
Yes.
And that's been the case. Dr. Herman mentioned a few months ago, of course, the newspaper article, and we have seen, and we did see an increase in reports coming in. And let me just speak for a moment about the nature of reports. The severity of allegations, there's a broad range. I mean, we receive reports of concerns that somebody has made an off-color remark or a sexual innuendo, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is a serious allegation of sexual harassment or sexual assault. And so there is a wide variety of the nature of the reports that we receive. As Dr. Perman said, it's very difficult to follow up with limited and sometimes little to no information other than we actually had a case that reported, the actual report was just the event that happened and there was nothing more in the report. And unfortunately, we don't have the capability of responding or following up to something if we don't have enough information. Sometimes follow-up doesn't mean investigation. Oftentimes, follow-up doesn't mean investigation. Most of the time, our follow-up will consist of either Stephanie, our outreach and education program director, or Mikkel, or one of the individuals within our office to go out and meet with the individuals who's either made the complaint or is inquiring or reporting a concern, and a lot of times it's just a conversation. Oftentimes it's a review of policies. It's a review of definitions. What does sexual harassment really mean? Sometimes we put interim, Mikkel can speak more to this, but there are interim measures that are put in place, and there are things that are done before an investigation ever begins. And so while, yes, oftentimes the need does arise for us to do a full-blown investigation, more often than not, there is follow-up. But every allegation, every concern is followed up, and the nature of that follow-up will be according to the severity and the nature of the allegation. Does that answer your question?
The hand here, can we get the mic? Sir.
Thank you. So I think rightly so, a lot of attention focuses on these allegations of sexual harassment, really the big profile stories. But I would wager that on this campus and probably in the world, what's much more common in general is a sort of disparaging, belittling sort of gender violence that really permeates a lot of interactions that students have here on this campus. Can you speak a little bit to what you're doing to address those sort of more micro scale problems that we're having that in some capacity permit the much larger scale problems to occur?
Thank you for the question. I would say that at this point, that is a frequent topic of conversation in the Diversity Advisory Council. And the council is in the process of thinking about educational tactics to deal with the issue that you're bringing up. It's unacceptable. I won't have it. And we've got to address it. So I would say we're not where we need to be, but it is on the table. Your advice and help, if you're willing to communicate it in another setting, would be most appreciated. Please.
Hi.
2 mics.
Thank you for having this for us. I wanted to talk about measuring the climate on the campus. And I know that the school had done a student campus climate survey last year, and that was supposed to come out in 2019. I was just wondering maybe what are the results from that, and if that's something we could disperse to the general campus, as well as particularly for the microaggressions and the sexual harassment. Has the school considered enacting another type of campus climate survey, such as ARC3, which has been used on other campuses?
The survey that you're referring to was conducted by our student affairs people and was done by a professional organization. The results are in. They were presented to the leadership group, that is the deans and the vice presidents, in December. And just today, I got an email, which I still need to read, in terms of our plan for making this public to the campus. I will tell you, interestingly, with regard to the specific topic we're talking today around sexual harassment, and you'll forgive me if I don't remember the data exactly, the student response, and by the way, the response rate to the survey was about 24%, which is excellent, with good participation from all the schools. Our students said to us that in terms of whether they feel safe, whether they would be comfortable that something would be done if they reported an inappropriate interaction or frank harassment, we were much better than the 42 other peer groups, institutions that were used. We had a 1% response that the campus would not take it seriously. Now that's the data, and we'll present it.
Just to go off.
Sure.
Was there any? Was there any disparity between males and females in the feeling of security?
I don't remember. I don't think so, but I may be wrong. But importantly, to your first question, the data will be presented shortly with an idea that, in contrast to what I just said, suggesting that everything is fine, everything is not fine. And we will use these data to create interventions. And then I think, Roger, we're planning for a follow-up survey. When?
So,
Roger Ward, our Senior Vice President for Accountability.
very quickly, so these surveys are intended to be done at least biannually. So there will be follow-up survey. The initial survey is always as a benchmark to see where we are. We compare ourselves to other institutions as well, but we have our own profile. So these surveys are most valuable to us when we understand what is happening in our community, when we could design from the responses we get action steps that we should be taking to improve in a particular area, and then later on, how we assess whether we're making strides or not. So as it relates to the student survey, I would imagine in another couple of years, we will re-administer the same survey and see how we are doing in terms of those responses. If I could just also add that in 2016, we also did a survey for faculty and staff. And in that survey, it was broader than just the Title IX issue. It looked at diversity, inclusion, people's sense of working in the place, how they feel about the working environment and so on. This year, and Matt Lasecki, our Associate VP for HR, is helping us to include more questions along the line pertaining specifically to sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, drawing on the questions that were in the student survey. And we're going to be re-administering a survey for the faculty and staff sometime this spring, probably as soon as next month.
We will disseminate the data to you. And then, again, as I said earlier, if you have input, please give it to me.
First of all, I'd like to commend President Berman who gave us this public forum to discuss about such a sensitive matter. And I'd like to suggest that although the topic is sexual harassment, that we can continue the conversation more broadly and talk about harassment in the workplace that has other components as well. But since this afternoon we talk about sexual harassment, I'd like to share with the group some of the findings that I thought was very interesting by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They established a task force to study harassment in the workplace. So focus on sexual harassment, how the 1 in 4 women, they experience sexual harassment in the workplace. And over approximately 90% of people involved, they do not report. And another finding was that although people involved in some kind of situation that was unwelcomely sexually based comment or behavior, they felt that was problematic and even offensive, but they didn't really consider it sexual harassment. So there is a lot of misunderstanding what really characterizes sexual harassment just because it's a joke or even a sexist remark. So based on this find, how as UMB community we can do a better job?
Thank you for the comments. Civility. Others, please. Right here.
Hi, my name is Mary Gallagher. I'm here to represent the Staff Senate.
Great.
We, in December, had a meeting to discuss this very topic and presented to our Staff Senate members and Executive Committee to champion a civility campaign. We've worked with senior leadership to communicate to them to ask for their input. We've developed a subcommittee for civility project. We've come up with a frame of which we could present as a campaign for awareness and practical application. So I've reached out to many senior executives. We would like to encourage working with your Office of Accountability, Dr. Ward, to come and meet with us to talk about this very issue. We would like to present this to the staff to contribute and acknowledge that to help us define on campus what is civility, what does it mean, how can we express it, how can we use it. So we really want to do this and spin it in a very positive way for engagement. We want staff to get involved and take a pledge to be a part of this civility.
We'll take it.
Okay, thank you.
Question here. I hope I'm not missing hands in the back. I'll look back there next.
Hello, my name
Hi.
is Trisha Tyson. I am a student at the medical school. I guess, so my comment is just, when I hear the word crisis, which has been thrown around a lot, I think of a very acute, unexpected, and surprising event or series of events. And my concern is that when this crisis abates, or when the news cycle moves forward, or when we move on, this generation of people moves on, that this activity will persist and these crises will continue to unfold in silence. And so I was wondering, more of just a concern, but I was wondering if you have a plan to make sure that even when the campus seems to move forward, that the voices of these people are not forgotten.
Very well said, and totally appropriate comment that reflects something that an individual in my position thinks about all the time. We're talking today about a critical issue, crisis, if you will, except that it's hardly a new crisis. We all know that. I acknowledge that. In a completely separate vein, many of you know that part of my platform, if you will allow me to use that word, has been to make sure that UMB is not just responsive to the community, and I'm talking to the community outside, but makes a difference to the community. Why am I bringing that up? Because I will feel very defeated once my presidency is over, if that's not part of the culture. And if the woman or man that replaces me is not hired specifically because he or she stands for, if you will, that legacy, I have to do the same thing with this. I think in what we do, it's not going to be admirable if we wait till everything quiets down. As you point out, you pointed it out eloquently, it needs to be in the fabric of the institution, in our DNA, if you will. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that happens. And where I'm falling short, I always count on the students to point it out. So you all have a job too while you're here. How about in the back first, and then I see another hand here. Anybody in the back that I'm missing? Okay, we'll do that, and then you, sir.
Thanks. There's a recent book by Michael Lewis that says humans are pretty bad statisticians, the Accountability Project. And last week at this Women in Science meeting, Claire Fraser mentioned that she'd been accused of not promoting women as fast in her IGS. And she said, no, I really find that important, and that's not possible. But she did a more statistical look into it and found that that was true, and she righted the situation, and then she fixed it by making more frequent reviews and more stringent criteria for how promotions should occur. And the numbers that caused her to see the problem are just not available. I think the accountability of the HR people should be stepped up a notch, should use analytics or statistics to actually tell us what are the numbers. I asked for those numbers when I made an HR complaint last January and was told that they're just not, they can't give them to me because it would reveal too much about the people working with me. So I think that needs to be fixed.
Okay, appreciate that. We'll put that as part of the agenda of the two groups that I mentioned at the outset that we're standing up. It's a complex issue, if I may comment on that, and it's generational in a way, and I don't think I'm telling anything out of school because I'm just illustrating a point. When I came to the University of Maryland initially in 1999 to be the chair of pediatrics, I gathered what I think was then 17 senior women. I mean senior in terms of tenured professors. And I said to them, tell me what we should do about the tenure clock. Some of you may think this is sexist or not appropriate, but the issue was that, particularly in pediatrics, we had many women, young women in faculty positions, junior women, if you will. And I was concerned that in terms of the opportunity for them to make tenure, they have a lot of other demands which impinge on their professional work. That is our society. So I said, shouldn't we do something about looking at this and changing the tenure clock? And some of you will probably guess what I was told. I was told to forget about it. We did it. They can do it too. I'm not criticizing those women. I'm suggesting to you that we are in a very dynamic world. Things change, people change, opinions change. There are opinions across the schools in terms of demography, and we're going to have to try to develop a consensus. But your points are very well taken, and that'll be an agenda item in terms of equity. You, please, get a mic over to you.
My name's Saad. I'm a third-year medical student here.
Hi.
And I'm currently doing some of these clinical rotations where some of this stuff has happened. I'm really glad to see you have the core values up there. The one that I think we really failed on is accountability. So I definitely like you to redefine that. I'm happy to hear about all the education efforts that we want to do around this issue, but I think a big problem here is that there's been a significant lack of accountability, and all of my classmates and I have read the case that has been presented. We know about the article, but we've also read more, and there were multiple opportunities where the school, I think, really failed on the accountability aspect.
I take the criticism and would not presume to argue with you, other than I would make the plea as a colleague that one can read and the facts may not be consistent, at least the facts as I understand them, with the facts that are presented. Beyond that, frankly, I cannot say more because it's a legal matter. So I don't completely agree with you about your conclusions, but that's all right. We can disagree. The conclusion I agree with you about is that we have much more improvement to make with regard to accountability. I can tell you that with regard to accountability, that also, though, circles back to the fact that we have to have, fine, using the hotline, whatever, it would help me to hold people accountable. It would help us to hold people accountable if we had the information we needed. But again, I'm not being argumentative with you with regard to needs to be better. Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Myra Walters. I am a psychologist in the Student Counseling Center. And one of the things that we would like to know, and maybe others, is what, if any, changes have been made related to the accountability value? What, if any, changes have been made in reporting requirements or even the process of investigating? I know that was addressed briefly, but if there are any important updates that might be helpful to know about that, that's my question.
I'm not sure that I can give you updates. I certainly would acknowledge that for a variety of reasons, the previous commenter is correct, that we have not held people sufficiently accountable. That's why I'm standing in front of you. I feel that facts need to be investigated. Again, facts need to be put forward. People have a right to respond. We are going to respect individual rights. But if wrongdoing is found, then there needs to be a corrective action. So that's the way I would look you straight in the face and respond at this point.
Is there anything Mikel might even say?
Please, any comment with regard to accountability?
I had to turn my microphone off to stop coughing and have it recorded. So can everybody hear me in the back? Okay, great. So, there's a continuing evolution here in terms of how we look at it, responding to reports, investigating where investigation is appropriate, et cetera. And a lot of that evolution comes from the conversations we're having with individuals when they're part of that process. Right? We see situations where the process works quite well. And we see examples of situations where there is definitely room for improvement. Susan and I have been examining our policies and procedures with all of those perspectives and experiences in mind. One of the most important things is that we continue to have that open dialogue, which is not just about the investigative process or the response process in the heat of whatever the specific concern is, but also more broadly. And I have had opportunity over the last 2 years to talk to a number of people, not only who have been part of our investigative process or response process, but people who are still dealing with sort of the aftermath of processes that had come before. And those conversations are central to exactly what you're asking about. We need to continue learning what the best possible approach is. And that's some of what you hear us articulating when we say it's not all about investigating. Sometimes it's about better understanding. Sometimes it's about community conversations, about bystander intervention, right? About the ways in which we reduce risk and we intervene on each other's behalf when we're recognizing situations that aren't quite right, so that in terms of an investigative process, in terms of that level of accountability, our energy and our effort can be focused on the things that warrant that level of response. And that's where we go back into that place of talking about our shared community responsibility. It's not that we want anyone to put themselves in harm's way by intervening in a place where maybe it's not appropriate. Sometimes bystander intervention means letting us know something happened, means letting us know you saw something, means contacting the university police because you don't know what to do about a situation. There can be all sorts of ways in which we as individuals participate and respond. And in doing so, we then create more space to be able to manage and see through an evolution in terms of the investigations and the responses that require that broader attention, that require the amount of focus, the amount of due process that's essential in terms of making certain that we are seeing through to accountability. Does that answer enough of your question, or is there something else there? Okay, great.
I want to be respectful of time. We have time for one more question. But before you all scatter after that, I want to make something clear. This is a dialogue, but it's not a one-and-done dialogue. We've shared with you mechanisms to bring information. We will get people around the table in the way that I mentioned. Please, as you see fit, share information so that we can make the place better. You have the last question. I'll give you a mic.
So this is just another comment on accountability. So I have friends, I'm a medical student, my name is Nicole Hayes. I have friends in the 4th year class, in the 3rd year class, and I remember last year hearing a lot about comments, a lot of the microaggressions about gender disparity, and sexual harassment.
Okay.
And I know for a fact that some of these instances had been reported. And I'm hearing again the same names being dropped from the 3rd year class. And I think that has to do with accountability. We're not seeing that kind of accountability. We're seeing the same names being mentioned. Women are being warned when they go into the hospital about who to avoid and who to brace for. So when we go into the hospital, we know what rotations and what people on those rotations we need to expect sexual harassment. And that should not be a part of our education. And that is part of the culture that's here right now.
I hear you loud and clear. And again, I would plead with you that since you have this knowledge, you need to bring it where it can be looked into. Then you'll be free to judge whether anything is done about it. But this is not information that we have. Please bring it forward as you see fit.
Dr. Perman, if I may.
Please.
After this session, our website, the Office of Accountability and Compliance, we've just created a new mechanism. It's not a consultation line, it's not a hotline, it doesn't ask for anything, it asks one single question. Have you seen, heard, or experienced anything that you feel is sexual harassment? And it's voluntary, there's no other information asked for. It's just a mechanism to do just what Dr. Perman said. If you want to use that mechanism, you can feel free to use that new mechanism.
Something else important for us to keep in mind is we do have a challenge here, which is a lot of students. I think we spoke at one of the town halls as well, and I thank you for being here as well. We need to be mindful of what we mean when we say something has been reported and then questioning whether something has been done or not. There are a number of instances in which my office has received reports that were essentially one-line statements from student surveys. There's very little we can do beyond making note of, to observe and wait to find patterns when all we receive is a single piece of information from a survey. So one of the things that I encourage is that is a report. It's a limited report in terms of our capacity to respond effectively. And so if that is the way in which we're going to be receiving reports, we need a lot of them. The hotline remains another option. My office door remains open to you and to other students, any individuals on this campus who want to talk more, whether it's about individuals who they have concerns about, or if it's about a more broader concern regarding what happens with reports. We can always have those conversations. One of the things that we have not talked about much here today that I think is a significant piece of this, and it goes back to the broader issue of civility and microaggressions and that sort of thing, has to do with power dynamics and who is in a position to say and do something to change a situation. That is a really challenging issue to address. And sometimes we can address it very quickly in one fell swoop, and sometimes it requires many, many people being willing to come forward to share their particular observations so that someone in a position like mine, a Title IX coordinator, for example, can begin to collect those pieces of understanding so that we don't just have the results of a culture survey, but we have the specific anecdotes that then support what we see in those cultural surveys, so we really can start to make those systemic changes. And those systemic changes are the kinds of changes that we hope will last generations of students, beyond who we see here today, experiencing what we're hearing reported today. So there's no simple answer. It's a complicated and complex issue, but all of these various points of frustration and these questions about how do we move forward all have a commonality in that we have an opportunity to put that information in a single place and to begin moving toward those solutions. As I said at the beginning, we can't do that without you. You can't do it without us, and we need to continue looking for the solutions to what do we do with things like those reports that perhaps our office at this moment can't do something with, but collectively over time we can. So let's continue that conversation in these forums and again in our office and in the hallways and on the streets as well. Thanks.
I'm going to finish where I started by genuinely thanking you for all the comments. They were all very frank and heartfelt, and I look for your partnership. Thank you.